Chapter 1. The Painter's Final Stroke. Thursday, 7:45 a.m.
Danielle Harper stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, toothbrush dangling from her lips. The fluorescent light flickered above her, casting faint shadows across her face. She looked exhausted. Not physically. She was young, healthy, but mentally, emotionally. The kind of tired that settled in the bones, weighing her down in ways she couldn't quite shake. She spat out the toothpaste and rinsed her mouth, running damp fingers through her tousled red curls. She had been up late painting again. Another long, sleepless night. She glanced at the clock. Damn. She was late. Grabbing her tote bag and a half-eaten granola bar from the counter, she rushed out the door. Once upon a time, in a world bursting with tales untold, there was a place where stories come to life. A place where the extraordinary became the everyday, and where every word carried you deeper into the unknown. This was not an ordinary place. It was a sanctuary for storytellers, dreamers, and wanderers alike. Welcome to all things storybound, where imagination has no limits and every tale takes you on an unforgettable journey. Here we unravel mysteries, delve into the fantastic, and explore the depths of the human heart. So whether you seek a gripping twist, a heartwarming revelation, or a world unlike any you've ever known, you're in the right place. Sit back, open your mind, and let us take you beyond the bounds of reality. Let the story begin.
Thursday, 8:22 a.m.
The morning air was crisp as she weaved through the busy streets of Brooklyn, dodging a man on a bicycle and a woman walking two tiny yapping dogs. The Mason Street Art Collective was only a few blocks away, a converted warehouse space where local artists rented studio time. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers, her escape, her workplace, her second home. When she arrived, the usual faces greeted her. "Morning, Harper," called Eddie, the old sculptor in the back corner. His hands were already coated in clay. "Morning," she replied, tossing her bag onto a chair. Her corner of the studio was a controlled mess. Paint-splattered drop cloths, brushes in old coffee mugs, unfinished canvases stacked against the wall. She exhaled, rolling her shoulders. Time to work.
Thursday, 11:40 a.m.
Danielle was lost in the strokes of her brush, painting over a rough outline of a woman standing in a neon-lit cityscape. Something about the figure wasn't right. Too stiff, too empty. She leaned back, chewing her lip. "You're going to overwork it," said Camille, her oldest friend in the studio. Danielle sighed. "It's missing something." Camille tilted her head, studying it. "Maybe it's missing you." Danielle frowned. "What do you mean?" Camille shrugged. "Your best pieces feel like pieces of you. This one," she tapped the canvas, "feels like you're holding back." Danielle exhaled. She hated when Camille was right. "Lunch?" Camille offered. Danielle hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I need a break."
Thursday, 1:05 p.m.
The cafe down the street smelled like fresh espresso and baked bread. Danielle stirred her iced coffee absently while Camille scrolled through her phone. "Oh, check this out," Camille said, turning her screen. Danielle glanced at the article. "Serial killer stalks the city? NYPD dismisses pattern in 5 murders." "Creepy," Danielle muttered. Camille nodded. "They're saying the victims had nothing in common. No connection. Just random." Danielle shuddered. "Maybe it's better not to know." Camille smirked. "Says the woman obsessed with exploring the human condition through art." Danielle rolled her eyes but laughed. "Fair."
Thursday, 4:30 p.m.
Back at the studio, Danielle stared at her canvas again. The neon lights of the cityscape glowed in electric blues and purples, but the woman at the center still felt hollow. Camille's words echoed in her mind. Maybe it's missing you. Danielle picked up a finer brush, dipping it into deep crimson. Slowly, deliberately, she traced a thin stroke across the woman's throat. A scarlet ribbon, sharp and final. Something clicked into place. She exhaled. That's it.
Thursday, 7:15 p.m.
The sun had set by the time she packed up. Camille had left an hour ago, and most of the artists had filtered out for the night. Danielle wiped her paint-streaked hands on her jeans and glanced at her phone. A missed call from her mother. She'd call her back later. As she stepped outside, she caught movement across the street. A man stood beneath the glow of a flickering street lamp, watching. Tall, dark hair, gray coat. Danielle frowned. Then, as quickly as she saw him, he was gone, blending into the crowd. She shook off the unease and started walking home.
Thursday, 10:42 p.m.
Her apartment was quiet except for the hum of her small radio playing in the background. She had been painting for hours, lost in the rhythm. The neon-lit woman on the canvas had taken shape, her presence strong, haunting. Danielle smiled, wiping sweat from her brow. Her last thought before bed was simple. Tomorrow, I'll finish it.
Breaking news. Local artist found dead in her apartment.
Tragedy struck early this morning when the body of 27-year-old artist Danielle Harper was discovered in her apartment. Authorities have not yet released details regarding the cause of death, but have confirmed that the death is being treated as suspicious. A source close to the investigation revealed that Harper's final painting, which remained unfinished at the time of her death, contained eerie details that investigators are now analyzing for potential clues. Friends and fellow artists have expressed shock and devastation over the loss of Harper, who was considered a rising talent in the New York art scene. She was brilliant, said Camille Lewis, a close friend and fellow painter. She had so much more to give. NYPD urges anyone with information to come forward as they continue their investigation.
Chapter 2. The Pianist's Last Note. Saturday, 10:32 p.m.
The last note lingered in the air, a soft, haunting whisper of sound that drifted through the dimly lit lounge. The scattered audience clapped, a polite, half-hearted applause from people more focused on their cocktails than the music. Lena Moreau let her fingers rest on the keys for a moment longer before exhaling and standing from the piano bench. She gave a slight nod to the audience, then moved toward the bar where her usual drink was waiting, a gin and tonic, light on the gin. You're zoning out again. Lena turned to see her friend and fellow musician, Carlos, sliding onto the stool beside her. I'm just tired, she muttered, taking a sip of her drink. Carlos snorted. You say that every night. Well, it's true every night. She wasn't lying. The late gigs, the constant hustle, the relentless competition, it wore her down in ways she never admitted aloud. Carlos studied her, then nudged her arm. You killed it tonight, by the way. Lena huffed. The audience barely noticed. Carlos shook his head. Nah, you had one fan. The guy in the corner. Gray coat, dark hair. He watched your whole set like he was studying scripture. Lena frowned, glancing toward the back of the lounge. Empty. Guess he left. Carlos shrugged. Lena turned back to her drink, trying to shake the strange unease creeping up her spine.
Sunday, 12:17 a.m.
Her apartment was small but cozy, a second-floor unit in a building with ancient plumbing and paper-thin walls. She kicked off her heels and collapsed onto the couch, rubbing her temples. She should sleep. But instead, she reached for the notebook on the coffee table. Music came to her in moments like this, when the world was quiet, when no one was watching. She flipped to a blank page and began scribbling a melody, the notes forming in her head before they ever touched the piano. After a while, she glanced at her phone. A text from Carlos. "Home safe?" Lena smiled. "Yeah, thanks for checking." She tossed her phone aside and stretched, exhaustion tugging at her limbs. Tomorrow, she'd finish the song.
Sunday, 9:42 a.m.
Lena woke to the sound of her upstairs neighbor stomping around, followed by the unmistakable gurgle of her coffee maker struggling to survive. She groaned, dragging herself out of bed. Sundays were her day off, the only day she allowed herself to exist outside of music. She made coffee, curled up by the window, and watched the city move below. Her fingers itched for the piano. Instead, she forced herself to focus on something else. A book, a crossword, anything to keep her mind from obsessing over the melody she had started last night. She lasted all of 10 minutes before she caved. Her fingers danced across the keys, pulling the melody from her mind into reality. It was haunting. Not intentionally, but something about it made her chest tighten, like she had unknowingly composed a goodbye. She shook the thought away.
Sunday, 2:10 p.m.
Lena met Emma, her childhood friend, for lunch at a quiet bistro downtown. "You look exhausted," Emma said, stirring her tea. Lena smirked. "Thanks." Emma gave her a pointed look. "I mean it. When's the last time you took a real break?" "This is a break." "No, this is a meal before another sleepless night." Lena sighed. "I love what I do." Emma softened. "I know. I just worry about you." Lena hesitated and then said, "Last night, there was a guy at the lounge, just watching me play. Carlos noticed too." Emma frowned. "Creepy?" "I don't know. Maybe I'm imagining things." Emma didn't look convinced. "Just be careful, okay?" Lena nodded, but the uneasy feeling lingered.
Monday, 6:58 p.m.
She arrived at the lounge early, taking a moment to warm up before the crowd filtered in. Carlos arrived minutes later, setting up his bass. "Ready for another night of drunk rich people pretending to like jazz?" Lena smirked. "Always." The lights dimmed, the murmuring crowd settled, and as the first note rang out, Lena let everything else fade away. Music was the one place she was untouchable.
Monday, 9:24 p.m.
Midway through her set, she saw him, the man in the gray coat, sitting in the back, watching. Her fingers faltered, just for a second, but she recovered quickly, masking the mistake with an improvised flourish. When the set ended, she glanced back. He was gone.
Monday, 11:17 p.m.
Lena left the club alone. Carlos had offered to walk her home, but she had waved him off. She just needed air, needed to clear her mind. The streets were quiet, the occasional car passing by in a blur of headlights. Then, footsteps. She slowed, turned. Nothing. She exhaled sharply and kept walking, heart hammering a little too fast. Her apartment was only a few blocks away. She picked up her pace. The footsteps returned. Closer. She turned again, quicker this time. The sidewalk was empty, but the feeling remained. Something was wrong. Her pulse pounded as she reached her building, fumbling with her keys. She stepped inside, locked the door behind her, and exhaled. Just nerves. Just exhaustion. Right?
Breaking news. Renowned jazz pianist found dead in her apartment.
Police confirmed this morning that Lena Moreau, a well-known pianist in the city's jazz scene, was found dead in her apartment late last night. The cause of death has not been released, but authorities are investigating. Friends and colleagues described Moreau as a talented musician with a passion for her craft. She had this way of making the piano speak, said Carlos Rivera, a bassist who often performed with her. I can't believe she's gone. According to sources, Moreau had expressed concerns about a stranger watching her in the days leading up to her death. Police have not confirmed if this was related to the crime, but urge anyone with information to come forward.
Chapter 3. The Librarian's Last Chapter. Thursday, 8:12 a.m.
Margaret Holloway had always preferred the quiet. It wasn't that she disliked people. She had simply learned to appreciate the comfort of solitude. The library had been her sanctuary for over 20 years, a place where the noise of the outside world couldn't touch her. She sipped her tea as she unlocked the grand oak doors of the Harbor Hill Library, the city's oldest and most treasured public archive. Inside, the scent of old books and polished wood greeted her like an old friend. Another day, another story waiting to be discovered.
Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Margaret set about her morning tasks, sorting returns, adjusting book displays, restocking the history section. By mid-morning, the library had filled with its usual crowd. Students hunched over laptops, retirees lost in novels, the occasional mother guiding a child through picture books. Margaret hummed softly as she shelved a stack of books. Then, "Excuse me," she turned. A man stood a few feet away, tall, dark-haired, wearing a gray coat. Margaret smiled politely. "How can I help you?" The man tilted his head slightly. "I'm looking for a book on disappearances." Margaret blinked. "Disappearances?" "Yes, historical ones." She considered this. "Are you looking for missing persons cases, unsolved mysteries, or something more literary?" "A bit of everything." Margaret nodded, leading him toward the true crime and history section. "This one covers some of the most famous vanishings in history," she said, pulling a thick volume from the shelf. "Some solved, some still open." The man took the book, flipping through the pages. "Fascinating." She gave a small chuckle. "I suppose it is, in a morbid way." He met her gaze. "You like stories, don't you?" Margaret hesitated. "Of course." "Why?" She frowned slightly. "Because they outlive us." The man smiled. "That's a beautiful way to put it." He set the book down, gave a polite nod, and walked away. Margaret stared after him, a strange unease creeping into her chest.
Thursday, 2:05 p.m.
The day passed in a blur of returned books and soft conversations. Margaret had nearly forgotten about the strange man until she saw him again. He was sitting at a reading table, skimming through a book on infamous disappearances. She watched him from the front desk, a small frown tugging at her lips. Something about him was unsettling. It wasn't his appearance, nor his mannerisms. It was the way he lingered, as if he wasn't just reading, he was studying. For a moment, she considered approaching him, but then he looked up, and his eyes locked onto hers. Margaret quickly turned away, pretending to busy herself with the register. When she glanced back moments later, he was gone.
Thursday, 6:45 p.m.
The library was nearly empty now. Margaret moved through the aisles, running her fingers along the spines of the books. She loved this part of the day, the quiet, the stillness. But tonight, the stillness felt wrong. Too heavy, too expectant. She finished her closing tasks quickly, double-checking that the doors were locked, the security lights on. Just before leaving, she glanced at the checkout log. The man had borrowed a book. Vanished. The world's most puzzling disappearances. Margaret shivered. Then she turned off the lights and left.
Friday, 8:03 a.m.
The next morning, the library felt different. Margaret wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the lingering unease from the night before. Maybe it was the storm clouds rolling in outside, casting long shadows through the windows. She shook off the feeling and went about her routine. Hours passed. By noon, she had almost convinced herself she had overreacted. Then, the man returned. Margaret was at the front desk when he approached, the book from yesterday in hand. "You're returning it already?" she asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. The man nodded. "I read fast." Margaret forced a smile. "I hope it was helpful." He placed the book on the counter, but didn't step away. Instead, he leaned forward slightly. "Do you believe," he asked softly, "that some stories are meant to stay unfinished?" Margaret hesitated. "I don't know," she admitted. The man studied her for a long moment, then he smiled. "Well," he murmured, "I suppose we'll find out." And with that, he turned and walked away. Margaret stood frozen, her hands trembling slightly.
Friday, 7:30 p.m.
She stayed later than usual. There was something comforting about the library at night, the books whispering their secrets to empty rooms. She made one last round through the aisles, adjusting shelves, returning misplaced books. Then, a sound. Soft, faint. Footsteps. Margaret's breath hitched. She turned sharply. "Hello?" No answer. She exhaled, shaking her head. Just my imagination. She moved toward the front desk. A shadow shifted in her peripheral vision. Margaret froze. The feeling of being watched coiled around her spine. She turned slowly. Nothing. But she knew. Someone was still here.
Breaking news. Longtime librarian found dead at Harbor Hill Library.
Early this morning, police discovered the body of Margaret Holloway, a senior librarian at Harbor Hill Library, in what authorities are calling a disturbing crime scene. Details have not been released, but sources confirm that her death bears similarities to the recent string of unsolved murders gripping the city. Ms. Holloway, who had worked at the library for over 2 decades, was beloved by the community. "She was a walking encyclopedia," said one patron. "She knew everything about every book in this place." Investigators are currently reviewing security footage from the library and urge anyone with information to come forward. This marks the city's 3rd mysterious homicide in the past few weeks.
Chapter 4. The Runner's Last Mile. Friday, 5:12 a.m.
The alarm on Jason Patel's phone buzzed to life, vibrating against his nightstand. He groaned, rubbing the sleep from his eyes before swinging his legs over the side of the bed. The world outside was still dark, the city half asleep. Perfect running weather. His morning routine was muscle memory. Quick stretches, splash of cold water on his face, a banana and protein shake for fuel. By 5:30 a.m., he was out the door, lacing up his sneakers on the stoop of his Brooklyn apartment. The air was crisp. A light drizzle misted the pavement, the early morning quiet only broken by the occasional passing car. Jason took a deep breath, feeling the anticipation settle in his muscles. Then he ran.
Friday, 6:10 a.m.
His usual route took him through Prospect Park, winding trails cutting through open green spaces and clusters of trees. He pushed himself harder, faster, enjoying the rhythmic pound of his feet against the pavement. The world faded when he ran. No deadlines, no stress, just movement. As he turned onto the black trail, something caught his eye. A man, standing near the tree line, half hidden in the early morning fog. Jason barely registered him before he was past him. It wasn't uncommon to see other early risers, dog walkers, fellow runners, but something about this guy unsettled him. The way he just stood there, watching. Jason shook it off and kept going.
Friday, 7:05 a.m.
By the time he reached his apartment again, sweat dripped from his brow. He checked his watch. 6 miles. Not bad. His body hummed with adrenaline as he stepped into the shower, letting the hot water loosen his muscles. As the steam curled around him, his mind drifted back to the man in the park. Still, silent, watching. Jason exhaled sharply. Forget it. He had a long day ahead.
Friday, 12:42 p.m.
Bro, you need to chill. Jason rolled his eyes as Ryan, his coworker and best friend, leaned back in his chair. I am chilled, Jason said, taking a bite of his salad. Ryan smirked. No, you are tense as hell. All you do is work and run. You need to mix it up. Jason huffed. Like what? I don't know. Go on a date. Have a drink. Do something that doesn't involve a stopwatch. Jason shook his head. I'm good, man. Ryan sighed. All right, fine. But at least tell me you're still doing that marathon next month. Jason nodded. Yeah, it's been on my list for a while. Ryan grinned. Then you better start running faster. Some dude's gonna smoke you. Jason smirked. Not a chance.
Friday, 6:22 p.m.
Jason tied his shoelaces, stretching his calves before stepping out onto the sidewalk. His body still ached from his morning run, but he had told himself he'd do another 5 miles before bed. It was routine, and routines kept him sharp. The streetlights had just started flickering on, the city shifting into its nighttime rhythm. Jason took a deep breath, then he ran.
Friday, 6:57 p.m.
Halfway through his route, Jason turned onto the waterfront trail. It was quieter here. No cars, no honking taxis, just the soft lapping of the river and the distant murmur of the city. The path stretched ahead, illuminated by dim street lamps spaced too far apart. Shadows pooled between them, pockets of darkness swallowing the gaps. Then, a sound. Footsteps. Jason's pulse quickened. He glanced over his shoulder. Nothing. He kept running, but the feeling didn't fade. Something was off. Then he saw him. The man in the gray coat. Standing beneath a street lamp. Watching. Jason's steps faltered for a half second. Then the man smiled. Jason's stomach twisted. Every instinct in his body screamed, run. He didn't hesitate.
Friday, 7:02 p.m.
Jason's legs burned as he pushed himself harder, his breath coming in sharp, ragged bursts. He didn't look back, didn't want to look back, but he could feel it. The weight of eyes, the unrelenting presence at his back. The trail curved ahead, disappearing into darkness. If he could just make it to the main road. A figure stepped out in front of him. Jason barely stopped in time, his breath hitching. Jason's blood turned to ice. How?
Breaking news. Marathon runner found dead on waterfront trail.
Authorities discovered the body of Jason Patel, a local marathon runner and tech consultant, early this morning on the city's waterfront trail. Police have not yet released details regarding the cause of death, but sources confirmed that the scene bore striking similarities to the other recent unsolved homicides in the city. Patel, 29, was well known in the local running community. Friends described him as driven, ambitious, and dedicated to his training. He was one of the best runners I knew, said his friend, Ryan Carter. He pushed himself harder than anyone. I can't believe he's gone. NYPD urges anyone with information to come forward as they continue their investigation.
Chapter 5. The Journalist's Last Headline. Saturday, 7:13 a.m.
Elliot Graves had 3 vices: cheap coffee, long nights, and chasing stories that could get him killed. He took a sip of the former as he scrolled through the morning's crime reports. The NYPD was still dodging questions about the city's latest unsolved deaths. 4 victims, no connection, no leads. At least none the public knew about. They still haven't even said if they were murdered or died some other way. But Elliot knew. The pattern was there, buried beneath the police's carefully worded denials. The victims weren't random. They had been chosen. He just had to prove it. His phone buzzed beside his laptop. New email, Silent Observer 93. Subject, you're close. Elliot's breath hitched. He clicked it open. I know what you're looking for. Meet me at 9 p.m., Parker's Alley. His pulse quickened. He had been exchanging messages with this anonymous source for weeks, each tip leading him closer to something big. And now he was about to get his answer.
Saturday, 9:42 a.m.
The newsroom was already buzzing by the time Elliot walked in, laptop under one arm, coffee in the other. His editor, Janice Adler, was waiting. Graves, tell me you're not still chasing this serial killer story. Elliot smirked. I could lie. Janice groaned. I don't have the energy to cover for you when the NYPD starts breathing down our necks. They already are. He dropped his bag onto his desk. Because they know I'm right. Janice crossed her arms. You don't have proof. Elliot held up his phone. I will tonight. She frowned. What the hell does that mean? He hesitated. He trusted Janice, but he also knew she wouldn't let him run into danger alone. I've got a source, he said vaguely. Someone who knows things the cops won't say. Janice exhaled sharply. You need to be careful. Elliot smirked. Careful doesn't break stories. Janice looked at him for a long moment, then muttered, Just don't get yourself killed, Graves. He gave her a 2-finger salute. No promises.
Saturday, 2:18 p.m.
Elliot spent the afternoon reviewing his notes. Each victim had been remarkable in some way. Danielle Harper, the painter, on the verge of her big break. Lena Moreau, a pianist whose talent had just started to turn heads. Margaret Holloway, a librarian with a deep knowledge of history. Jason Patel, an athlete who pushed his limits nightly. They were different, yet there was something tying them together. Something he was missing. Elliot rubbed his temples. What the hell am I not seeing? His phone buzzed again. New email. Silent Observer 93. Subject. Trust no one. Come alone, 9 p.m., Parker's Alley. Elliot's grip tightened. One way or another, he was getting his answers tonight.
Saturday, 8:57 p.m.
Parker's Alley was the kind of place that swallowed sound. Elliot pulled his jacket tighter around him as he approached. The air was damp, the distant hum of the city muffled by the high brick walls on either side. He checked his watch. 8:59. A flickering street light buzzed overhead. He waited. And then, footsteps. Elliot's breath caught. A figure stepped into view, emerging from the darkness like a ghost. Tall, dark hair, gray coat. Elliot's stomach twisted. Something about him was wrong. The man smiled. Mr. Graves. Elliot swallowed. Who are you? The man took another step forward. You already know. A slow chill crept up Elliot's spine. This wasn't his source. This was the killer.
Saturday, 9:01 p.m.
Elliot's mind raced. He had to play it smart. You knew I was looking for you, he said carefully. The man nodded. Of course. You're persistent. Elliot forced himself to stay calm. So what now? You kill me? The man chuckled. You assume I haven't already. Elliot tensed. What the hell does that mean? The man tilted his head. Stories are funny things, aren't they? They exist before they're told, before the world even knows they're happening. Elliot's fingers twitched toward his phone. If he could record this, send it to Janice. The man's smile didn't waver. Go ahead. Elliot hesitated. How did you know what I was thinking? The man stepped closer, lowering his voice. Because you're predictable, Mr. Graves, and predictable people don't make it to the final chapter. Elliot's breath came fast and uneven. This wasn't just a meeting. This was a trap, and he had walked right into it.
Breaking news. Investigative journalist found dead in Parker's Alley.
Early this morning, authorities discovered the body of Elliot Graves, an investigative journalist known for his relentless pursuit of the truth. Graves was found in Parker's Alley, an area known for crime, though police have not yet confirmed whether his death is related to the ongoing string of unsolved murders in the city. Sources close to the investigation reveal that Graves had been working on a major story regarding the recent homicides, leading some to speculate that he may have uncovered something dangerous. His editor, Janice Adler, expressed shock and grief at the loss. Elliot was fearless, Adler said. He never backed down from the truth. If someone did this to silence him, they're wrong, because now we're all going to be looking for answers. NYPD is urging anyone with information to come forward as they continue their investigation.
Chapter 6. The Collector's Confession. Monday, 2:17 a.m. NYPD interrogation room.
Detective Harris leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. The dim light above them flickered slightly, casting shadows across the gray walls. Across from him, Philip Crane sat with the same unsettling calm he had carried from the moment he walked into the precinct and turned himself in. No handcuffs, no resistance, just a quiet smile and 5 stories. 5 deaths. 5 endings. Harris exhaled, rubbing his temples. So that's it. That's why you did it? Because you wanted to collect them? Philip tilted his head slightly, as if considering the question. I didn't want to collect them, Detective. I had to. Harris frowned. Why now? Philip's smile deepened. Because every good story needs an ending. Harris studied him. For weeks, the NYPD had been chasing ghosts, scattered bodies with no apparent connection, no clear motive. Now, the man responsible was sitting in front of him, calm, smiling, satisfied. Explain, Harris said. Philip leaned forward slightly, the weight of his words measured. I didn't do this for fame. I don't care if anyone knows me. But a collection isn't complete until the curator decides it is. And I decided. Harris's jaw clenched. You decided to stop? Philip shook his head. I decided to make sure someone saw the whole picture. His eyes gleamed. And that someone is you. Harris resisted the urge to shift in his seat. So what? He asked. You're done, just like that. Philip chuckled softly. Oh, Detective, I finished this story long before you ever realized there was one. Harris's grip on his pen tightened. Tell me about them, the victims. Philip's fingers tapped against the steel table. 1, 2, 3. Then he began. The painter, Danielle Harper. She was special, Philip mused. She created. She had the kind of talent that lingered, you know, a painter on the verge of something great. Harris remained silent, letting him talk. She let me into her apartment, trusted me to look at her work, and in that moment, I knew. Knew what? Harris asked. Philip smiled. That she belonged in my collection. He sighed, almost wistful. She left her final painting unfinished. I like to think she would have understood why I completed it for her. Harris's stomach turned. You killed her in her own apartment. Philip nodded. Where else would she belong? The pianist, Lena Moreau. Music is a beautiful thing, Philip continued. It's mathematical, structured. Every note falls exactly where it's meant to. Lena understood that. You followed her, Harris said flatly. Philip nodded. She saw me. She felt me before she even knew I was real. Harris's fist clenched. You stalked her. I studied her, Philip corrected. Like any good collector, I listened to her final set, watched as she lost herself in the music, and then I gave her a final note. Harris exhaled through his nose. You cut her throat. Philip tapped his fingers against the table again. 1, 2, 3. Silence is the most powerful note of all, detective. The librarian, Margaret Holloway. She spent her life surrounded by stories, Philip murmured. Books, history, knowledge. Harris didn't speak. She saw me twice. The first time, she thought I was just another patron. The second time, she knew something wasn't right. Harris clenched his jaw. She was afraid of you. Philip nodded. Yes, and fear. Fear makes a story real. He sighed. She stayed late that night, unaware she had already been written into the ending. Harris forced himself to keep his voice even. And you killed her there, in the place she loved. Philip nodded. Where else would a librarian meet her final chapter? The runner, Jason Patel. Harris tightened his grip on the file in front of him. He was fast, Philip said simply. You chased him. Philip shook his head. I let him think I was chasing him. In truth, he had already been caught. Harris's jaw clenched. You toyed with him. Philip's lips curved upward. I tested him. How fast could he go? How much could he push himself? He leaned forward slightly. He felt it, you know. The moment he realized he wasn't running toward safety, he was running toward me. Harris felt his stomach churn. Fear, Philip whispered, makes the heart race in the most beautiful way. Harris swallowed bile. And when he stopped running, Philip smiled. I stopped too. The journalist, Elliot Graves. Harris swallowed his anger. Elliot was looking for you. Philip nodded. Yes, and he found me. You lured him. Philip chuckled. No, detective. He chased me. He wanted to know the story. He thought he was the one writing it. Harris exhaled sharply. And instead, he became a part of it. Philip's fingers drummed again. 1, 2, 3. I let him think he was in control. Let him believe he was about to expose something no one else could see. Philip's dark eyes glinted. The irony? He was always meant to be the final chapter.
Monday, 3:05 a.m.
Silence filled the interrogation room. Harris stared at the man across from him, the man who had taken 5 lives without hesitation. Philip held his gaze, unbothered. Finally, Harris spoke. "Why tell me all this?" Philip smiled, his fingers tapping one last time. 1, 2, 3. "Because now you're part of the story, too." Harris's breath caught. Philip leaned back, satisfied. And every collection needs a final piece. A slow chill crawled up Harris's spine, because he understood. Philip Crane hadn't turned himself in to end the story. He had turned himself in to make sure someone else finished it. Harris exhaled, forcing himself to stay composed. "No," he said quietly. Philip only smiled, as if he knew something Harris didn't. And maybe, just maybe, he did. The collection was complete. Or was it?